Hello, welcome to 30 Minutes. I'm Patty Stalker. Please join me for the next half hour as I sit down with Angus Jennings. He's the candidate for Lieutenant Governor of Massachusetts for the United Independent Party. He and Evan Falchuk will be running against Charlie Baker and Martha Coakley in the November election. They plan on upsetting the two-party rule here in Massachusetts. It's a great conversation, so stick around. It's 30 Minutes. So Angus, thank you so much for joining me today on 30 Minutes.
Thank you for inviting me. I'm very happy to be here.
So, November election, you are an independent party candidate in the highly entrenched Democratic Massachusetts.
That's right.
Okay, so you've got a big road ahead of you, I would think?
That's for sure. But it's funny because Massachusetts is thought of as a deep blue state, but we actually have the highest percentage of unenrolled voters anywhere in the country. 53% of people do not self-identify as either of the major parties. So the opportunity is there. That in no way diminishes the task ahead, but Evan Falchuk and I are working hard every day, covering a lot of ground, and we're having a good time while we're at it. So.
I've seen a couple of your ads. They look really good, and I've checked out your website. It's full of information, and so if anyone really wants to, get into detail to things that we are talking about today, so it's www.falchuk2014.org, and they can hit that. You guys have a 3-point slogan, which is?
We believe that everybody is equal. We believe that everybody's civil rights need to be protected and that the government needs to spend taxpayer money wisely. Now, most people that we meet out on the campaign trail share those values, but they also agree that neither of the major parties represents that combination of values today.
I want to go into each one of those points separately, and we can give examples, or you can give examples of how you see your party reaching those goals. But why don't we talk a little bit about you and Evan and your backgrounds and how you sort of got involved in politics. So why don't we start with you? Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Terrific. So I've spent my entire career in municipal public service, either as an employee to cities and towns, including here in Westford, as the Director of Land Use Management, and as a consultant to cities and towns, both with a small practice for about 5 years in the 2000s, and then early last year, I began my own LLC, and my client base is primarily cities and towns. So I had actually worked for a couple of federal agencies before graduate school and during graduate school.
Where'd you go to school?
I went to Trinity College undergrad. I studied philosophy and sociology. Then I worked for a couple of years in DC and Baltimore, and I went to Cornell University for city planning.
Oh, impressive.
So coming out of grad school, I had opportunities at the federal government level, but through my research and really I think this is important to kind of my governmental philosophy, I really feel strongly that the closer you are to the ground and to people, the more effective you can be in really making a difference. And I advise every young planner and planning student that I work with, spend time in municipal government, in town hall. Even if you end up going on to work at a different layer of government or go to the private sector, that time working locally will be totally invaluable. Now for me, up until this current run for statewide office, I've chosen to put my entire professional energy toward municipal government because especially here in Massachusetts, where we have a home rule form of government, that's where many of the most important decisions of government are made. I feel that home rule more and more is becoming more of an illusion. And I think that's something that we as Massachusetts citizens need to be concerned about because home rule is embedded in our Constitution and it's embedded in our culture. And when you're talking about issues like economic development, job creation, housing, and infrastructure and public spaces. Those are all issues that play out at the local level. And those planning and zoning board hearings, conservation commission, selectmen, those evening meetings that go on year-round and here in Westford Town Hall and across the Commonwealth are really the best platform for citizens to get involved and really make a difference. So when you look at specific policies the state has put into place over time, and the feds, by the way,
right.
that have increasingly undercut the reality of home rule, that's something I think we need to be concerned about. I've heard things said by both by the governor and by his kind of senior lieutenants that, in my view, are talking down to cities and towns, that are condescending to cities and towns, when in fact some of the best people I've worked with in my career, not just in government generally, but across the board, are those hardworking people in city and town hall, whether they are personnel, whether they're volunteer board members giving of their time. These are the people that make our system work. And I feel that the tendency that I have observed from the current administration of focusing on the big projects and not getting into the nuance, the detail of how our cities and towns work every day, it reflects a real lack of understanding of what the Commonwealth of Massachusetts is all about. Again, not just culturally, but within our Constitution.
So the home rule idea is that cities and towns can, on a local level, make their own laws and bylaws, and that's the general idea of the home rule.
Yep.
But what you're saying is mandates that are coming down from the state are impeding towns from doing that?
That's right, because
okay.
Cities and towns, as you know, are constrained by Proposition 2.5. So you have a finite growth in your resources, and when year on year, new mandates are coming down from the state and the feds, and there is essentially the same pool of resource to handle all of that, plus all of what they were handling last year and 5 years ago and 10 years ago. The cumulative effect of all of that, and I've felt this when I've been working as an employee in town hall, is when your time as a local official, which certainly my view is I'm accountable to the public interest and to the people of the community.
Right, of your town.
The more time that I'm spending doing paperwork for someone at a different level of government, to me, is taking time away from the resource that I can put toward real issues on the ground.
What are some of these mandates that you're talking about?
Well, I think one
Like
from a macro level is, we've talked a bit about Chapter 40B.
Okay, that's affordable housing.
That's right. Now, Chapter 40B was put on the books in 1969 at a very different time in our Commonwealth's history.
I didn't realize it was on the books that long.
That's
right.
right.
I didn't realize that. Interesting.
And it has not been amended since that time.
Oh my.
So we are dealing with a law from a different era. It was put on the books at a time when, and there were a lot of very well-intentioned people involved with that. There was a very real need to ensure that housing was created not just in the center city but throughout the region to create opportunity. I'm a big believer in the ideals of that law. But looking back, and what we know now in 2014, and frankly what we've known for quite some time, is that housing cannot be considered independent of jobs, of transportation, of public spaces, of public infrastructure, and that includes not just roads and water and sewer, but also schools and public facilities. So we really, Evan Falchuk and I, and frankly many of my colleagues in the planning community across the Commonwealth, take a more comprehensive view of how you plan for a community. So to consider housing in isolation is simply doesn't reflect what we know about how communities can thrive. The role of the planner in the community, working with Public Works and the committee structure, is to set out a long-term vision for the community and help put in place policies to achieve that vision, and also to be part of the capital planning process. Because a community, in order to have a rational plan for growth, needs to have some reasonable expectation of where is the growth going to happen, what types of impacts will it have on our schools and other public facilities, so that the appropriate planning, design, and investments can be made to ensure that people moving into the community have the same access to resources that are what make the community great. In other words, to make sure that the new private investment makes the community stronger and doesn't degrade what is great about the community. To be clear, I feel it is squarely the responsibility of the public sector, including at the local level, to provide for the needs of its citizens, including the newest citizens.
Good.
Absolutely, and
Right.
I believe very strongly in social equity and creating opportunity
Absolutely.
for people who have not had opportunities and frankly have been harmed the most by our overheated housing market. The people with the least have been hurt the most. So I'm a strong believer in creating opportunities, creating homes for people to live.
Great.
But I believe that can happen in the context of home rule, not by overruling local planning priorities, but in fact by channeling that growth in ways that are consistent with those priorities.
Why would I vote for Falchuk Jennings? Am I throwing my vote away? So how do you respond to, I'm sure you're hearing that on the campaign trail and in probably every interview that you do, correct?
The short answer is that Evan Falchuk and I are working very hard every day. We're covering a lot of ground. We see a lot at the grassroots level that is not reflected in the polls, but we know that there is something going on, and people are very excited not just about our candidacy, but about the idea of building a new party and the idea, the opportunity that exists to get in on the ground floor of a new party, because there are many, many people across the Commonwealth and beyond that have had it with the two-party system. We are running for two reasons. We're running to win, and we believe there is a path. We know it's a narrow path, and we know if we are successful, we will achieve what the Lowell Sun early on said would be the upset of the century. We'd certainly love to be part of that. And we also recognize that it's a long road and we may not win. But this is what's so exciting about what we're doing. If we don't win, but we get more than 3% of the vote statewide, the United Independent Party will go from a party designation, which it is right now, to an actual recognized political party. That confers all kinds of benefits in terms of standing and credibility, in terms of fundraising ability, and that allows the United Independent Party to field smart independent candidates across the Commonwealth in 2016. And part of the concern that both Evan Falchuk and I have on our democracy here in the Commonwealth is that so many races at the state House and Senate level are uncontested, cycle after cycle. We feel just as in sports, Magic Johnson and Larry Bird made one another better. Competition makes people better. If we have a democratic system without real competition, we are not getting the healthy exchange of ideas that are really fundamental to the functioning of our democracy.
The Thriving Communities Action Plan, why don't you tell our viewers a little bit about that?
So our campaign is very focused on the cost of living here in Massachusetts, healthcare costs and housing costs. On the housing cost side, which is where I've spent quite a lot of my career in the local land use and housing arena, you cannot deal with housing costs without dealing with local government, because zoning, because those decisions are made locally. So what we've had in the last 15 years or so is a real estate market that has provided both typically very expensive single-family homes and then multifamily homes, very often constructed under Chapter 40B. So you've got a tremendous gulf between those type of housing products with nothing in the middle. So for myself and my wife, I'm 39, my wife Kristen is in her 30s, and we have a young daughter, Carol Ann, who's not quite 2. We bought our first home about 4 years ago in the center of Concord. We live in a two-family. It's a side-by-side.
I lived in a two-family in Arlington. Yep, when
and
I had a first married. Yep,
it's just wonderful. It's
I loved
a
it.
great starter home.
It
We
is.
live in walking distance to transit, the grocery store, everything else. The market is not producing that type of housing anymore. So people in their 30s or 20s who do not already own property, and I've talked with many, many of them, they do not see a realistic path for them to own property in Massachusetts. And if they're like me, growing up in Wilbraham, I always envisioned that I would spend my life in Massachusetts. I love it here. And it's been very, very troubling, both from a personal level, but also from an economic level, for the Commonwealth to see so many people in their 20s and 30s leave the state in the last 15 years because they can't afford to stay here, and they can get more for their money elsewhere.
Are they statistically leaving?
Oh yes,
Yeah.
yes, in significant numbers.
Okay.
And this also so housing is a family issue because the effect of that is it drives families apart. It's also an economic issue and a jobs issue because the housing costs in Massachusetts drive up labor costs because the employers have to pay that much more. So when a company is looking to either locate or expand in Massachusetts relative to other parts of the country that have lower cost housing, they could save perhaps $10,000 to $15,000 per employee per year. Now when they're financing these projects, they're looking over a 20 to 30 year time horizon. Needless to say, that adds up very quickly, and that is part of why Massachusetts has not been as competitive as it needs to be to really realize the potential of the tremendous educational infrastructure, all of the bright people who are coming out of our colleges and universities every year. That is a tremendous advantage Massachusetts has relative to virtually anywhere else, in the nation. The more of those people can find a home here, set down roots, and become contributing members of our communities and our economy over time, that is what will ensure that the success we've seen in Boston since the turnaround back in the 80s isn't just a flash in the pan, but 10, 15, 20 years out, we still have not just a strong metropolitan area, but even stronger than
But
it is.
how do you see doing that?
So part of what you need to do is make it in a community's financial self-interest to allow the type of housing that we're talking about to be built. People may be aware that there is often concern about allowing more housing because of the school costs, and concern that the property tax will not pay for the school costs of the children coming out of the development. What we've said in our Thriving Communities Plan is if communities enact zoning in areas that make sense to them for growth, so it's not up to the state to tell Westford or any other town where you need to grow, but if the community sets zoning that allows for this type of housing, the state, under this policy, would hold that community harmless from the additional school costs that they would incur. In addition, the state would channel its infrastructure funding so that in addition to the private investment, you're getting public investment in streets and sidewalks and lighting and the kind of amenities that you see in some terrific neighborhoods. We have also said that communities that enact this zoning would actually be entitled to a safe harbor under Chapter 40B. So by proactively setting out a positive vision of growth in places that make sense, that would
To that town.
result in adaptive reuse of historic structures, bringing new vitality to a commercial area, for instance, those communities will now, by controlling 40B, have the ability to enforce their zoning throughout their town. So it really is intended to align the interests of the Commonwealth in seeing more housing get built, and each city and town to having control over where that happens, what it looks like, and to make sure that the infrastructure is in place so that it is a real asset to the community.
But some of the other unfunded mandates, what about the people that say, but the whole idea behind it, if you tell towns you don't have to do this, how many towns are just going to say then we're not going to do it?
Mandates almost across the board are put in place for a reason. And at the time it was enacted, the legislature felt it was important enough to mandate that function or that service or that benefit to citizens. Our thought is that government needs to be honest with people about what it's doing. And when you pass a mandate, but you don't provide resources, that's, in my view, a very cynical approach to government where, oh, we passed a law, that's done. Well, you work at town hall, or you talk with people who work locally, whether that's in city or town hall or in the schools, and they see that these mandates come down year after year. The resources are finite, they're increasingly stretched. So those words of, oh, we've solved that problem, start to ring hollow, because you're starting to balancing those mandates with the other mandates with your overall responsibilities, I like to say if you have 40 front burner issues, they're all de facto back burner issues. So if a function is important enough that it must be mandated, then we need to pay for it.
Okay.
So we've got to pay for the government we say we want.
So what you say is you're going to look at the ones that are most important, and those are the ones you're going to fund, and the other ones we can't fund them right now. Something along those lines?
It's part of what Evan and I have talked at length about is a right sizing of government. Because if you've got all of these mandated functions, and if everyone agrees these are really important, well, then let's do a hard-nosed look at the responsibilities of a typical town hall in Westford. You look top to bottom and say, okay, this is what the law says we have to do. Then you add to that, this is what our local bylaws and regulations compel us to do. And then you look beyond that to simply constituent service. And when you're working in town hall, you have 20, 30, 40 people a day coming in with an issue. And I'll tell you what, if you don't help them, you're not going to have a job very long. So, I was always the go-to guy in town hall. You solve those problems. So that's all cumulatively part of your job. When you do that assessment, I think any objective person would say, well, geez, by no measure are there enough resources to actually implement that. That's where the conversation begins.
Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the problem of the rising cost of healthcare here in Massachusetts and what your plan is for combating that.
So I don't need to tell your viewers that they've experienced significant increases and far greater than the rate of inflation. One of the key underlying drivers of healthcare cost increases in Massachusetts has been the increasing consolidation of hospitals into these multi-party systems. That's been in the news most recently with Partners' acquisition of South Shore Hospital, but it's part of a long-term trend that began in the mid-90s with deregulation of the hospitals, which began under Governor Weld when Charlie Baker was Health and Human Services Secretary. What's happened since
Who's going to be
then,
your opponent in November?
As it turns out. So this monopolistic consolidation of hospitals into these conglomerates has given them essentially monopoly pricing power. And that's been reflected. There was a study just a couple of days ago that showed Partners' increases had outpaced any other hospital in the Commonwealth. So,
it's outrageous.
And when you look into the finer points of this, and Evan has an encyclopedic knowledge of the business model and how this all plays out, it really is a key cost driver. What's interesting is Evan was talking about that as a candidate more than 6 months before any other candidate, because this is the type of issue that if you're within the party structure, talking about big hospitals, big insurance companies, that can be disruptive to members of your financial base. But as an independent candidate, you have the ability to speak frankly about what's really going on. And as it turns out, the state's Independent Health Policy Commission is in total agreement with what Evan has said in terms of the effect that the Partners deal would have on cost to consumers on the South Shore, estimating that it would cost consumers upwards of $30 million per year if that merger ends up going forward.
So how do you see combating that, though? Like, what will you actually do?
So part of that is to take advantage of the authority within the Attorney General's office. We've had antitrust laws on our books for a long time. They are in place for exactly this reason. It's not to say companies can't get larger, but there's got to be a check and balance looking at the public interest and whether a particular deal will negatively impact the public interest. From a bigger picture standpoint, Evan has also called for what's referred to as an all-payer system, which is something that's been in place in Maryland for about since the 80s, which has the effect of, rather than our current fee-for-service model, where the hospital gets more revenues the more a patient comes in the Maryland all-payer system, without going into too much detail,
Right.
It creates a financial incentive for that hospital to keep its patients healthy, because the healthier its patients are, the more it stands to profit financially. So it aligns the incentives.
Let's talk quickly about Evan's background.
Evan began his career as an attorney in doing Securities Exchange Commission enforcement for 5 years, but then he came up to Boston and joined the executive leadership team of a firm called Best Doctors, He was part of the leadership for 13 years, including as president. And during that time, the company grew from 9 employees to over 600 employees worldwide. And it's based on getting patients the right diagnosis and the right treatment. That, which seems like a simple concept, people who've gone through the system know you often get ping-ponged around to many specialists. That ends up accounting for more than 20% of total healthcare spending. So he really has an exceptional record both of creating jobs, but also innovating in the arena of healthcare and business models. And he's got just exactly the right skill set for what we need at this time.
So we've talked about the economy and what you guys see as ways to sort of change and make it more robust, and job creation and housing and healthcare. But I want to make sure that people understand your progressive views, your pro-gender equality when it comes to pay for women, your pro-LGBT community. You believe in sensible gun control. Stop me if I say anything wrong.
All good.
You're against the death penalty.
That's right.
Labeling of GMOs. You believe in climate change.
We absolutely do.
Okay, and you
pro-choice.
Pro-choice. Yep. So that's that progressive side that I think will have a lot of the Democratic base taking a look at you guys and saying, okay, this isn't an independent party or a Republican saying they're independent to get the Democratic vote or to look more liberal. So you guys actually believe in these social progressive ideas.
Part of our values, yes.
Yeah. Okay, so November, you've got a big race ahead.
We do.
What one thing would you like to get across to the viewers about you and Evan?
I think our governing philosophy, we feel that a lot of good people have been left out of the process for too long. As we talked about, more than half of voters are not part of either of the major parties, yet 100% of our elected representation on Beacon Hill fits in one of those boxes. Most people, when you talk with them, they don't fit into one of the boxes, or they may self-identify politically one way or the other, but they don't want to go to cocktail parties for 10 or 15 years to become the party nominee. So they end up on the sidelines. And a lot of people who have real potential to provide real leadership in the realm of elected politics don't end up getting involved. So part of what we're doing is we're building a path into the system for smart, independent people who can be part of our public leadership going forward. We also feel very strongly that we as a Commonwealth need to empower our cities and towns and embrace home rule, not as an impediment to growth, but actually with the realignment of incentives that would result from our Thriving Communities Action Plan. We believe that by empowering our cities and towns and giving them the tools they need to set out a positive vision of growth and to achieve that vision, that is the way that we can truly empower and achieve the vision and enterprise of every city and town.
I'm excited to see what happens in November. Okay, Falchuk Jennings.
That's right.
Angus Jennings, good luck.
Thank you so much.
And
I
thank you
appreciate
so
it.
much for joining me.
Thank you.
And thank you for joining me today on 30 Minutes.